Good afternoon. Am I audible? Am I audible? Can someone please write?
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Am I audible? So, I'm starting today's lecture. Can someone write so that I can start the lecture? Whether you are able to visualize the screen or able to hear me? So, let me start because I've checked on my mobile. My voice is clear. So I'm starting today's lecture. It is water and electrolyte balance. So before moving towards acid-base balance, let us discuss about water and electrolyte balance. I have discussed about water in my previous class of physical biochemistry. Little bit here we will discuss in detail. My screen, I think it's not moving. So just wait for 2 minutes. Thank you, Vaibhav. I'm starting class. Just wait for 2 minutes. So, water is the chief constituent of human body, and it comprises approximately 60 to 70% of the total body weight. In an adult of 70 kg body weight, total body water is 60 to 70%, which comes around 36 to 49 liters, out of which 65% is the intracellular water. Okay, approximately coming on to 35 liter. If you calculate from this percentage, 70 kg of body weight, and extracellular fluid is 35%. So the main component of the fluid is present inside the cell, whereas the extracellular fluid is rest 35%. The interstitial tissue fluid, the fluid which is around the cells, that is known as interstitial tissue fluid. We have seen interstitial tissue fluid while I discussed about edema, which is around 25%. This is the fluid around the cells or tissues. It comprises the 25% of the extracellular fluid, coming around to 11 liter, and plasma and intravascular fluid comes around 8%, that is 3 liter, and transcellular fluid constitutes your lymph and CSF, which comes around 2%. So this is again a diagrammatic representation. This is intracellular fluid, which is 65%. Then this is interstitial fluid, which is 25% of this 35%. Then your plasma, that is your intravascular fluid, 8%. And then coming to transcellular fluid, that is 2%, that comes around to 35%. Again, a different kind of a representation. So this is a newborn. The newborn child has 80% of body constitutes with the fluid, whereas in adult it reduces to 60%, and in male and female the ratio is slightly different. In adult male it's 60%, whereas in female it's around 50%. So this is the total body weight of a female, total body weight of a male, and this is the fluid distribution: 50 to 55% in females, whereas 60% in adult males. Rest constituted by the solids. Okay, and this coming around, if we distribute this 60%, 2/3 is, because 65% of this 60% is coming around 2/3, that is intracellular fluid. Next 1/3, which is 35%, it further constitutes with the interstitial fluid, that is 80%, that is 25%. Rest 8% is plasma, and 2% is your transcellular fluid. So functions of the body water, so the percentage may be slightly different in different slide, but more or less 2/3 is intracellular and 1/3 is in extracellular. Extracellular constitute interstitial fluid, and then plasma, and then transcellular fluid. Then coming to the next slide, which is the function. We have already discussed the function. Going very rapidly with the functions. Water acts as a reactant. It helps in the transportation, regulates the body temperature, transports various hormones, enzyme, blood, platelets, red blood cells, white blood cells. Water acts as a solvent for electrolytes and non-electrolytes. Water facilitates digestion and promoting elimination of the ingested fluid. Water serves as a tissue lubricant. Body water input is how you take the water. So this is your body water input, how you take water and how you excrete water. So main source is exogenous source, which is by drinking water and beverages like juices, etc., which constitutes 1000 to 1500 ml of water you drink daily. So because of the various functions or involvement of water in various metabolic reactions, it is always advisable to drink 8 to 10 glasses of water daily. So it comes approximately, if we calculate, if one glass constitute 250 ml, you multiply it with 8, so it comes around approximately 2 ml. So main exogenous source of water is mainly by drinking water and beverages, then water from cooked foods. Then comes, because in cooking you use water, whether you use it for kneading your flour or cooking the vegetables. Then comes endogenous water. In various metabolic reactions like metabolic oxidation of food, it produces water. You might have seen that TCA cycle, the final products are carbon dioxide and water. So metabolic water is approximately 400 ml. So body water output, that was the input, how you take water, and then comes how you excrete water. So body loses water through kidneys mainly, that is major chunk constitutes 1500 ml per day. This is an average value. So evaporation from skin, that is 600 ml per day. Then exhalation from lungs, that comes around 300 ml per day, and rest is from the feces, constitutes approximately 100 ml per day. So this is your average daily intake, mainly in water in the beverages, then moist food, then water of metabolism. Don't go with this number 250, 750. Just see a percentage. 60% major component is from the drinking water and from beverages, then moist food 30%, and 10% is from the uh, water of metabolism. Then comes your average daily output of water, that is total output. Water lost in urine, that is 60%. Water lost through skin and lungs, that is 28%. Water lost in feces, 6%. And water lost in sweat, that is 6%. So this is your intake or input output chart. Again, different kind of representation. Urine, breathing, skin, feces, these are the outputs, sources of water, and drinking, food, and metabolism, these are the input sources. So now coming to the electrolyte. What are electrolytes? Electrolytes are the substances which when dissolved in solution dissociates into ions, are able to carry an electric current. Salts like sodium chloride, potassium chloride in aqueous solution gets dissociated to charged ions, sodium, potassium, and chloride, called as electrolytes. The concentration of these electrolytes is expressed in concentration of electrolyte we express as milliequivalent per liter. So this is the distribution of electrolytes in different body fluid compartment, that is intracellular and extracellular. Intracellular, the major cation is potassium, whereas extracellular is sodium. Then comes magnesium and phosphorus. Phosphorus is the major anion, whereas chloride in the intracellular component compartment, whereas in chloride, uh, this is the major anion for the extracellular. Along with the, then second comes the bicarbonates. So this is the composition of ECF cations, ECF anions. Sodium is the major cation, and the concentration is 140 milliequivalent, because I have told you we measure the electrolytes in the milliequivalent per liter. So whenever you see some lab report and you have to see the unit for the electrolytes, it is milliequivalent per liter, whereas chloride is the major anion for the ECF, the coming around 103 milliequivalent per liter. After this, potassium, calcium, magnesium, they all are present in cations, but in the minor quantities. So the total cation composition of ECF is 155 milliequivalent, whereas after chloride in ECF, the another anion which is present is, and the concentration is around 22 to 26 milliequivalent per liter, that is bicarbonate anion. And this is mainly responsible for, this is also help in maintaining the alkali reserve. When we go for this acid base balance, this is the major anion which helps in also known as alkali reserve of the body. And after that bicarbonate, you have phosphate and sulfate. So total anion comes around 155 milliequivalent per liter. Then this is the intracellular fluid cations and intracellular fluid anion. Major you see here, it's potassium, that is 150 milliequivalent per liter, and major anion of ICF is one for phosphate, which is 140 milliequivalent. So rest are in the minor quantities. So this is the total cations is 195 milliequivalent per liter, whereas total anions are 195 milliequivalent per liter. So this is different compartments. Red is shown by showing blood plasma, whereas blue is showing interstitial fluid. yellow is showing intracellular fluid. So you can see here sodium is major component of the interstitial fluid. So this is the concentration 142 in blood plasma, whereas 145 in the interstitial fluid, whereas in intracellular fluid it is 10 milliequivalent per liter. You see the units, it is milliequivalent per liter. So, and if you see potassium, this is mainly intracellular. Now coming to major anion, you see here in blood plasma and in the interstitial fluid, you can see the chloride concentration, whereas bicarbonate concentration in the interstitial fluid and in the blood plasma. And this is the phosphate ion, organic phosphates. This is 100 milliequivalent per liter in the intracellular fluid. Then sulfate comes, and finally proteins. So major intracellular fluid anion is phosphate, then sulfate, and then proteins, whereas extracellular extracellular anion is chloride and bicarbonate. Intracellular cation is sodium, whereas potassium is mainly intracellular. This is extracellular. The sodium is extracellular, whereas intracellular is mainly sodium. So now predominant cations and anions of ECF are sodium and chloride respectively, and predominant cations and anions of ICF are potassium and phosphate respectively. And to maintain electrical neutrality in each fluid component, the number of cations should be equal to number of anions. This we have seen from Donan membrane equilibrium mechanism also. So why sodium is more extracellularly? Because of this sodium pump. Sodium rapidly enters in the cell by the sodium pump. Sodium is effectively extrudes out of ICF by active transport of sodium out of cell. This is sodium potassium ATPase pump, which uses the energy of ATP, and it extrudes 3 sodium and in exchange with 2 potassium. So the sodium potassium pumps sodium ions outside the cell, and potassiums are pumped inside the cell, and the energy to drive the pump is released by the hydrolysis of ATP. So in the concentration gradient of sodium, potassium and chloride, potassium tends to diffuse out of cells, okay, and chloride enters inside the cells. So during difference in electrical potential, for example, in relative negativity inside the cell, it tends to keep chloride out and potassium in. So what is the function of what are the functions of body electrolytes? Electrolytes, they mainly produce the tonicity of the medium. So it helps in maintaining the osmotic pressure of various components or compartments in the body. So this osmotic pressure, it basically pulls a force on the water and helps in maintaining the water balance. We have read another term, oncotic pressure, which was due to the plasma protein. I have told you in the physical properties, physical chemistry chapter about the oncotic pressure, how it maintains the interstitial fluid and prevents the edema formation in our body. So potassium, it is essential for maintaining the normal membrane excitability for nerve impulses. Sodium maintains the cell membrane neutrality by it is the most abundant electrolyte in the ECF. Chloride regulates the osmotic pressure and assists in regulating acid-base balance. Calcium promotes the nerve impulse and muscle contraction and relaxation. Magnesium plays a role in carbohydrate, protein metabolism, storage and use of intracellular energy, and neural transmission. It is also important in functioning of heart, nerves, and muscles. So just repetition of few terms: diffusion, osmosis. Diffusion is movement of particles down a concentration gradient. In diffusion, there is random movement of particles in all directions through a solution, whereas If diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane, it is known as osmosis. That is the movement of water across a membrane from a less concentrated solution to a more concentrated solution. Active transport is movement of substance across permeable membrane, and gradient, it requires energy. And sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, mainly it is basically because of this pump. Then filtration, water and dissolved substances from an area of high hydrostatic pressure to an area of low hydrostatic pressure. I think these two terms Dr. Rashmi might have cleared in the transport. Then coming to the osmotic pressure. I've told you it is the hydrostatic pressure required to stop the flow of water by osmosis is called as osmotic pressure. And the osmotic pressure is measured in two terms, osmolarity and osmolality. So one difference is only if we are measuring the number of osmotically active particles, that is mole in per liter of a solution. So you can remember from the mnemonics, molarity, liter, so both have R in common. So the number of osmotically active particles per liter of solution is known as osmolarity, whereas osmolality is number of moles per kg of a solvent. So how you can measure the plasma osmolality? It is given by this formula: 2 into sodium concentration plus 2 into potassium concentration plus urea plus glucose. So it is usually measured by in the units of milliosmol per kg, and sodium being the major contributor of the plasma osmolarity, because it is the major electrolyte of ECF, so it contributes 90% of the plasma osmolarity. So if we have to calculate, if we don't have these two readings of urea and glucose, and if we have only sodium potassium unit, then also you can calculate the plasma osmolarity by doing the multiplication of plasma sodium values with 2, and it comes around 285, because I've told you normal plasma concentration, sodium concentration is 135 to 145 milli equivalent per liter. So it is if I multiply it with 2, it comes around 285 to 295 milliosmol per kg. And it is we use an instrument which is known as osmometer, which helps in measuring the plasma osmolality. So disturbance is osmotic equilibrium of compartments, draws water from the compartment with lower osmotic pressure, that is hypotonic, into the compartment with higher osmotic pressure, that is hypertonic, until equilibrium is restored. I've shown you one diagram where I've shown you RBCs kept in hypotonic and hypertonic, or you have seen in your homes also resins kept in a no, that is an example, sorry. So I've shown you RBCs shrinking and RBCs swelling up if we keep them in the hypertonic or hypertonic solution. So why electrolyte balance is important? Healthy body usually obeys the law of electrical neutrality. So fluid in any compartment contain equal number of cations and anions. So in healthy state, osmotic pressure due to cations is equal to osmotic pressure due to anions. So it is basically the because this electrolyte, they helps in maintaining the osmotic pressure. So in healthy state, osmotic pressure is maintained by the electrolyte balance. So osmotic equilibrium created by electrolytes helps in maintaining the water balance. So finally, the osmotic equilibrium which these electrolytes they create, they help in maintaining the water balance. If there is any imbalance in electrolytes, it directly affects water balance. Hence, factors regulating the water and electrolytes, they are interlinked. So now coming to what are the factors which regulate water and electrolyte balance. So solute Homeostasis is maintained by iron transport, water movement, kidney function, and these functions act to keep body fluids electrically neutral and osmotically stable. So these are the various mechanism, neural mechanism, which operates through the thirst. Then various hormones, antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin, renin-angiotensin system, aldosterone, atrial natriuretic peptide, kinins, all these hormones, various proteins, peptides, and neural mechanism, they together work in close association with each other to maintain the normal water balance and osmotic equilibrium. A kidney play a role in regulating water and electrolyte balance in body normally. So when the body water is lowered due to either when you are not taking fluids or when the fluid is not available, or you have some pathology due to which you are not able to, like you have vomiting or diarrhea, or you have some mechanical obstruction due to some carcinoma, then there is no intake of fluid leading to water shortage. And when body fluids lost through obligatory losses in diarrhea, for example in diarrhea in urine and feces, this leads to or uh, decrease in the volume of body fluids with respect to solutes and rise in the osmotic pressure. I think this is clear. If we lose the water, then definitely solute concentration will increase, leading to rise in osmotic pressure. So ECF volume decreases, becomes hypertonic. This tends to draw water from ICF, causing cellular dehydration. So this is how it is shown. This is your ECF component. First, water, if water loses, this component lose the water, gets shrunk, solute concentration increases, due to which there is movement of water from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid due to osmosis, which leads to cellular dehydration, and it stimulates the thirst center, which is located in the hypothalamus. In response to stimulus to thirst center, there occurs dryness of mouth and pharynx, feeling of thirst makes you drink water. So this is your neural mechanism that operates through the thirst. Water ingested orally to quench the thirst to regulate the body water. Next comes antidiuretic hormone, which is also known as vasopressin. Antidiuretic hormone ADH is produced in hypothalamus and stored in posterior pituitary gland. An increase in osmolality, that is sodium concentration of plasma, promotes ADH secretion and vice versa. ADH is water conservation hormone. It acts on renal collecting tubules, which helps in facultative reabsorption of water from the distal tubules. Only water gets reabsorbed through the water. There are some receptors which helps in reabsorption of water from the collecting tubules. So urine output will be lower and water, body water will be maintained. Next comes renin-angiotensin system. It works when there is low blood volume due to some loss of blood, or when there is low blood pressure. It causes the release of renin from the juxtaglomerular apparatus of kidneys. Renin acts on angiotensin, which is a protein formed from liver. It gets split into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 goes to lung via the circulation. In lungs, there is an enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme, which converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. You might be reading about angiotensin converting enzyme receptors as far as COVID-19 mechanism is concerned. So, because COVID-19, the S protein of COVID-19, it binds with ACE receptors. Just a small reference here. Angiotensin 2 then stimulates adrenal gland to release aldosterone, Aldosterone then increases the peripheral vasoconstriction. So this is the mechanism. Whenever there is decreased blood pressure or low blood volume, both leads to constriction of renal arterioles, leading to stimulation of juxtaglomerular apparatus of kidneys, releasing the renin. Renin acts on protein angiotensinogen, which is released by liver. Angiotensinogen gets converted to angiotensin 1. It goes to lung through circulation where angiotensin converting enzymes are present. It converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 has vasoconstricting effect on the arterioles, increases blood pressure, whereas the other mechanism is through adrenal cortex. It releases aldosterone, which is a mineralocorticoid released by the zona glomerulosa of adrenal corticoid, and aldosterone, it finally increases water reabsorption and decreases urine volume output or urine volume and increases blood pressure. So in this way the blood this is body water is maintained. So aldosterone is a steroid hormone. It is a mineralocorticoid produced by zona glomerulosa of adrenal cortex. It has important effect on mineral metabolism. Aldosterone is released as part of renin-angiotensin mechanism, acts on the renal distal convoluted tubule. The hormone aldosterone by its action increases the rate of reabsorption of sodium and chloride. It increases potassium loss through urine. So aldosterone, it mainly acts on the distal tubules. It helps sodium reabsorption, whereas loss of potassium, and along with sodium there is reabsorption of chloride also. Thus it increases sodium uptake from the tubular fluid, and along with sodium there is reabsorption of water. Thus it regulates water reabsorption by renal tubules, and add into blood makes excretion of potassium. So factors affecting aldosterone secretion: decreased renal perfusion, increased renal secretion, renin secretion. Renin acts on angiotensinogen, converts it angiotensin 1, finally gets converted to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 acts on adrenal medulla, adrenal cortex, increases the release of aldosterone. Aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption, potassium excretion. So finally these are the other factors: decreased sodium concentration, increased serum potassium concentration, increased ACTH, which is because of stress, physical trauma. All these three factors also helps in increasing aldosterone secretion, and finally sodium levels are maintained, and excess potassiums are excreted outside our body, maintaining the osmotic pressure, and along with sodium there is reabsorption of water. So this is again another diagrammatic representation of renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So just a repetition: renin acts on angiotensinogen, angiotensin 1, ACE acts on it, angiotensin 2 getting converting to angiotensin 2. It acts on the tubular cells, helps in reabsorption of sodium in exchange with potassium. Along with sodium, chloride and water also gets reabsorbed. Okay, and angiotensin 2, it has a effect on the sympathetic activity, leading to arterial vasoconstriction, increased in blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 also stimulates ADH secretion, which acts on the collecting ducts and helps in facultative water reabsorption from the collecting ducts. Okay. Now coming to atrial natriuretic peptide, its action is almost opposite to what we have just talked. ANP is a cardiac hormone. It is secreted by right atrium of heart. It is a polypeptide hormone which is released in response to increased blood pressure in atria. Due to increased blood volume, ANP opposes the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So it decreases ADH release. AMP stimulates excretion of sodium and water, and it reduces vascular resistance by causing vasodilation. So these are various hormones, tabulated form. I'm in few of my slides I just repeat the things so that you can able to get the message. So this is aldosterone, which is secreted by the zona glomerulosa of adrenal cortex. It regulates sodium, potassium levels, so sodium and water retention. ADH, it is synthesized by hypothalamus, stored in posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary releases ADH. It increases water reabsorption, helps in retention of water. Renin-angiotensin system, release of renin by juxtaglomerular cells in response to hypovolemia and low blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 increases blood pressure by vasoconstriction. It also stimulates aldosterone production and retention of leading to retention of sodium and water. Atrial natriuretic peptide, it stimulates, it is released because of the stimulation of atrial stretch receptors, inhibit renin and aldosterone secretion, causes elimination of sodium, and finally it increases urinary excretion of sodium. So this is I have compiled together regulation of body fluid volume, how it is maintained. Hypervolemia, excess body fluid volume, it inhibits ADH release, aldosterone release, and thirst is also inhibited, contributed to decreased urination of dilute and increased urination leading to dilute urine formation. Normal fluid volume is restored. Whereas hypovolemia or deficient fluid volume, it stimulates thirst leading to ADH release. Aldosterone release contributed to decreased urination, retention of sodium along with water, and concentrated urine formation, and restoring the blood fluid volume. So what are the disturbances? Now we have seen how our body fluid is maintained, what is input, what is output, what are the normal electrolytes in ECF and ICF, and how body fluid volume is regulated. Now comes body fluid disturbances, which can be classified into three broad categories. Should I give break for 2 minutes? Can someone inform me? Do you need any repetition? Any repetition or lecture is clear? So just a break of 5 minutes if you want to recollect things. I'm just putting my slide. So coming back, I'm just trying to move my slide, but again, my screen is jam. Just wait for 2 more minutes. Actually, this chapter is very important as far as your ward posting, because you have to maintain body fluid and electrolyte balance in almost all patients who are coming and admitting in the ward, whether it is post surgery, pre surgery, or even in the medicine department, who are admitted with a complaint of diarrhea, vomiting, or some hormonal insufficiencies. So in various diseases, you find there is imbalance of body fluid and body electrolytes, and you have to maintain the balance, because in elderly population also hyponatremia is very common. So these kinds of patients, once they get admission in the wards, you have to maintain body fluid and your body electrolyte balance. Not able to move my screen. let me see, just few more minutes. And yeah, so now coming to body fluid disturbances can be classified into three broad categories. There can be change in the volume leading to hypovolemia or hypervolemia, changes in the concentration of electrolytes, whether it is hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypernatremia, hyperkalemia, hypomagnesemia, hypercalcemia, hypocalcemia. So depending on which electrolyte we are talking, then changes in the composition. I've told you about bicarbonate and chloride. These two ions, they help in maintaining the acid base imbalance along with the H plus ions concentration. So any change in the concentration of calcium, magnesium and potassium also changes the composition of body fluids. So what are the causes of water depletion? It is because of decreased intake of water. Whenever there is inadequate water supply, or there is some mechanical obstruction for drinking, or there is some impaired response of thirst center, for example in comatose patients, there is decreased intake of water, or if there is any increased loss of water. So these two factors only, they causes water depletion. Either your intake is disturbed or your output is increased. So increased loss of water is increased renal loss of water in renal tubular acidosis, in diabetes insipidus, increased loss of water from skin in burns patient due to excessive sweating, increased loss through lungs whenever patient is hyperventilating, increased loss through gut when patient is suffering from vomiting or diarrhea. So all these cases, any renal pathology, any loss, increased loss from skin in burn patients, in lungs diseases when patient, or in some compensatory mechanism of acid base metabolism when there is hyperventilation, or loss of water from guts in vomiting and diarrhea, they lead to increased loss of water. So this loss can be isotonic. This can because then there is ECF contraction, so this loss can be isotonic, hypertonic and hypotonic. So when there is loss of sodium and water, so common causes are SI obstruction, loss of GI fluid, SI fistula, paralytic ileus. In this decrease in the ECF volume, ICF volume is normal and osmolality is normal. So the fluid contraction is isotonic. Then comes hypertonic. When there is only water depletion, sodium gets retained, like in diarrhea and diabetes insipidus. There is decreased ECF volume. ICF volume decreases because there is more sodium concentration in the ECF, so it draws water from the intracellular fluid and osmolality is increased. Then comes another volume disorder, that is hypotonic, in which there is sodium depletion occurs when there is infusion of IV fluids with low sodium, like dextrose fluid. When we infuse, there is sodium depletion. And in the hormonal deficiency, when there is aldosterone deficiency, it leads to Addison disease causing hypertonic volume contraction. So there is decreased ECF volume, whereas ICF volume increases and osmolality is also decreased. So this is, if I show by the diagrammatic representation, this is your normal hydrated condition, this is ICF, this is your ECF 65%, 35%. So in isotonic dehydration, contraction of this extracellular fluid only. Hypotonic dehydration, because contraction of extracellular fluid and expansion of intracellular fluid. Whereas in hypertonic dehydration, expansion of extracellular fluid and contraction of intracellular fluid. I think it is clear by this diagram also. Okay. So volume disorder which are secondary to sodium balance. there is ECF expansion. It can be isotonic, hypertonic, and hypotonic. Again, there is water and sodium retention. For example, there is edema, which is secondary to cardiac failure, or secondary hyperaldosteronism due to hypoalbuminemia. There is increased extracellular fluid volume. These are condition of the ECF expansion. There initially we have discussed about ECF contraction. So now we are discussing about ECF expansion. Whenever there is cardiac failure, there is retention of body fluid, and along with sodium there is water retention also. There is edema, and it happens secondary to the hyperaldosteronism due to hypoalbuminemia. There is increased ECF volume, and ICF volume is normal, osmolality is also normal. Then comes only sodium retention happens due to excess mineralocorticoid, which happens in Cushing syndromes or Conn syndrome. Then ECF expansion is hypertonic, in which this ECF volume is increased, whereas ICF volume is decreased and osmolality is increased. If you keep it by compartment wise and put this, just see this diagram. Similarly, this diagram. So this is isotonic overhydration. So expansion of extracellular fluid space only. Then comes hypotonic overhydration. So expansion of both extracellular and intracellular fluid compartment. Whereas hypertonic overhydration, it leads to expansion of extracellular fluid and contraction of the ECF fluid. So these lines, they demarcate the ICF. So just imagine the concentration of sodium in that particular compartment and think where the water should move. So then this table is very easy to understand. Whereas in case of hypotonic, which happens in water retention due to ADH excess or glomerular dysfunction, there is increased ECF, due to which the ICF volume also increases, because it is hypotonic expansion. Water, there is more concentration of sodium in the intracellular fluid, it draws water from ICF, so there is expansion of ICF also, and the osmolality, it decreases. So there are different degrees of dehydration. Whenever there is fluid loss, if it is mild loss, moderate loss, and severe loss, then according to this classification, less than 50 ml per kg, it is mild. It is moderate when it is 50 to 90 ml, and if it is more than 100 ml per kg, it becomes a severe dehydration. Then skin color changes accordingly. Mainly it is skin turgor or elasticity. If you pinch your skin and try to elevate it, it is known as skin elasticity or skin turgor. It is decreased whenever there is dehydration. There is loss of skin elasticity, which is very poor in a severe degree of dehydration. Just whenever you go to pediatric ward and you get a pediatric age group patient with severe loss of water due to diarrhea or vomiting, if you see the skin elasticity, it is very poor in those kids. So in moderate it is poor, whereas it is slightly decreased in mild dehydration. So mucous membrane, it is dry, whereas in moderate it is very dry and parched in severe dehydration. Urine output decreased in mild dehydration. There is less urine output, which is known as oliguria. If volume decreases up to a certain extent, it is known as oliguria. And if it is, there is urine output, if calculated in 24 hours, if it fits in that criteria, it becomes oliguria. And if it is marked oliguria, there is severe dehydration. Then comes BP. BP is usually normal in mild dehydration, whereas it is normal to lower in moderately, whereas it is lowered in severe dehydration. Pulse is normal or increased. BP and pulse, they almost go in opposite direction. Whereas it in moderate, it increased. and in severe dehydration it is rapid and thready. So earliest detectable sign of dehydration are low BP, dry skin and mucous membrane, sunken eyeballs, and in neonates where fontanellas they are not solidified or they are not ossified. Basically, there is, if you put pressure on the fontanellas to check the degree of dehydration in the neonates, when mother comes with the history of vomiting and diarrhea, you usually put pressure on the fontanellas just to check the severity of the dehydration. So they are also sunken if dehydration is of either moderate or severe. Then circulatory failure, which is measured by the coolness of extremities and loss of skin elasticity, delayed capillary refilling, there is lethargy and confusion also. And what are the biochemical finding? Plasma sodium, it is increased if it is which kind of fluid loss? Depending on the fluid loss, it is okay. So you can see from here if there is loss of sodium and water, or there is simple water depletion, or there is only sodium depletion. So according to you that you can get the biochemical finding. If it is only water loss, sodium increased, plasma sodium increased, urine output or volume decreased, and urine is usually concentrated. Treatment is basically you have to give plenty of water to expand ECF and improve circulatory and renal function, treatment of underlying causes, and replacement of fluid deficit by 5% dextrose. So water excess or overhydration or water intoxication, we have seen in this picture. What are the causes? So I'm just again discussing the same causes. Whenever there is excessive intake of water, which happens in compulsive drinking of water, that is known as psychogenic polydipsia, excessive administration of fluid through parental route, impaired renal excretion of water, severe renal failure, SIADH syndrome of inappropriate ADH. Whenever there is because ADH, it helps in reabsorption, facultative reabsorption of water from the collecting ducts of kidneys. So whenever there is inappropriate secretion of ADH, it leads to water retention, leading to overhydration, and drugs acting as vasopressin agonist. So what happens in SIADH? There is elevated serum ADH, plasma is hypoosmolality, plasma has hypoosmolality, there is normal renal, thyroid and adrenal function, increased urine sodium excretion, dilutional hyponatremia. Their clinical features are behavioral disturbances, confusion, headache, muscle twitching, convulsions, and coma. SIADH, you usually encounter this condition in old patient, geriatric population. Okay, so biochemical findings is plasma sodium decrease because of the dilutional hyponatremia, decreased plasma osmolality because of increased water retention, urine is I think this term is something wrong. If urine is so treatment of the what is the treatment? Urine should be concentrated. So treatment is treatment of underlying cause, fluid restriction, and treatment you can give by giving vasopressin antagonist. Another term comes diabetes insipidus. It is a disorder of posterior lobe of pituitary gland characterized by deficiency of antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. There is polydipsia because when ADH is deficient, there is polydipsia, large volume of dilute urine characterize the disorder. Types of diabetes insipidus is it can be central and it can be nephrogenic. So central, it is very common after head trauma or surgery, pituitary or hypothalamic tumor, intracerebral occlusion or infection. Whereas in nephrogenic diabetic insipidus, any systemic involvement of kidney, multiple myeloma, sickle cell anemia, polycystic kidney disease, pyelonephritis, and medication with lithium. So what happens? In central, there is loss of vasopressin producing cells causing deficiency of ADH. Deficiency result uh, uh, Deficiency of ADH result in inability to conserve water, leading to extreme polyuria and polydipsia. So nephrogenic diabetes, there is diabetes insipidus. What happens here? There is depression of aldosterone release or inability of nephrons to respond to ADH, causing extreme polyuria and polydipsia. So central, it affects basically the cells which produce vasopressin in the hypothalamus, leading to deficiency of ADH, and which leads to inability to conserve water, leading to extreme polyuria and polydipsia. Whereas in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, either there is depression of aldosterone release, or your nephrons, where ADH usually have receptors and helps in facultative water absorption, they don't respond to ADH, causing extreme polyuria and polydipsia. So signs are polyuria with urine output up to 5 to 15 liter per day. Normally it is 1500 ml per day, 1.5 to 2 liter. Whereas if it raises up to 5 to 15 liter per day, it is polyuria. Polydipsia, especially a desire for cold fluids, marked dehydration, because water is being excreted in from the kidneys, which is evidenced by dry mucous membrane, dry skin. So all features of dehydration, you will see severe dehydration and weight loss. There can be anorexia and epigastric fullness, nocturia, and related fatigue from interrupted sleep. So diagnostic test will be high serum osmolality, because urine is highly dilute, leading to higher serum. So it is basically serum gets concentrated because of movement of water from the extracellular fluid. So high serum osmolality above 300 milliosmol per kg of water, low urine osmolality, usually 50 to 200 milliosmol of water, and low urine specific gravity, increased creatinine and blood urea levels resulting from dehydration, positive response to water deprivation test, that is urine output decreases and specific gravity increases. So treatment is replacement of vasopressin. In SIADH we give vasopressin antagonist, whereas treatment is in diabetes insipidus, where there is central diabetes insipidus, you can replace it with the vasopressin therapy, intranasal or IV. It is known as desmopressin acetate. Correction of dehydration and electrolyte imbalance, and a thiazide diuretic to deplete sodium and increase renal water reabsorption, and restriction of salt and protein intake. Then comes electrolyte imbalance. So what is electrolyte imbalance? Whenever there is deficiency of either sodium or excess of sodium, deficiency of potassium, excess of potassium, or chloride imbalance, or magnesium imbalance, or calcium imbalance, these all are electrolytes which are present in our body. And the term hyponatremia, when the deficiency of sodium is less than 130, normal levels are 130 to 145, this level plus minus 5 according to the lab normal values. So sodium deficit less than 130 milliequivalent per liter is known as hyponatremia. Sodium excess more than 145 milliequivalent, that is hypernatremia. Normal potassium concentration is 3.5 to 5. So when levels drops from 3.5, it is known as hypokalemia, and when it goes above 5, they are known as hyperkalemia. Chloride imbalance, normal values are around 95 to 110. So less than 98 milliequivalent per liter, hypochloremia, whereas more than 110 it is hyperchloremia. Magnesium imbalance, normal range is 1.5 to 2.5. So less than 1.5 hypomagnesemia and more than 2.5 is milliequivalent per liter is. So you can see the units in all the conditions. It is milliequivalent per liter, leading to sorry, these are basically units. So these are various conditions where electrolyte imbalance happens. So now coming to hypernatremia and hyponatremia, which is because of sodium deficiency or sodium excess. When it is sodium levels more than 145 milliequivalent per liter, it is condition is known as hypernatremia, caused by excess water loss or overall sodium excess. Either it is because you take sodium from sodium chloride. Okay, sodium levels are maintained by normal sodium chloride salt in our body. So excess salt intake, hypertonic solutions, excess aldosterone, diabetes insipidus, increased water loss, water deprivation. So all these leads to hypernatremia. The signs and symptoms are thirst, dry, flushed skin, sticky tongue, mucous membrane is dry. So all these are features of hypernatremia. So causes, I am again repeating. Should I repeat again? It is because of excess aldosterone. So or because of Cushing syndrome, okay, or because of increased or prolonged use of steroids. Then hyponatremia occurs with net loss of sodium or net water excess, which is leading to dilutional hyponatremia when the values go below 130 milliequivalent per liter. Kidney diseases with salt wasting, okay, in which there is sodium gets depleted from the body. Adrenal insufficiency, because here you have seen excess aldosterone or Cushing syndrome or excess steroid use, whereas opposite, when there is adrenal insufficiency, it leads to hyponatremia. GI losses due to fistula, gastric aspiration, diabetic ketoacidosis, due to osmotic diuresis leading to sodium losses, increased sweating, and insufficient ADH release. Syndrome of inappropriate ADH, SIADH. Again, postural hypotension, postural dizziness, abdominal cramp, diarrhea, tachycardia, convulsions, and coma. So the treatment is correction of fluid and electrolyte balance. Now coming to hyperkalemia. This is potassium excess is known as hyperkalemia, whereas when the levels they go below less than 3.5, I've told you normal range is 3.5 to 5. When the levels are more than 5.1 or more than 5, you can say it is condition is known as hyperkalemia, and when level drops from 3.5, it is known as hypokalemia. So primary causes are renal failure, and major symptom is cardiac irregularity. In hyperkalemia, there is always ECG changes which shows bradycardia, heart block, white QRS pattern, cardiac arrest also. This you will study in detail how potassium it helps, it causes these irregularities in physiology in detail. So fluid volume deficit, massive cell damage, excess potassium given, adrenal insufficiency, acidosis, rapid infusion of stored blood, and potassium sparing diuretics. These all leads to hyperkalemia, and signs and symptoms mainly include dysrhythmias and paresthesias. Okay, And whenever there is hypokalemia, that when the levels are less than 3.5, ECG shows irregularities because of ventricular defect. Most common electrolyte imbalance affects cardiac conduction and function. Most common causes potassium wasting diuretics. Another causes are diarrhea, vomiting, alkalosis, excess aldosterone secretion, polyuria, extreme sweating, insulin to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. All these uh, causes hypokalemia. Sign and symptoms are weakness, ventricular dysarrhythmias, and irregular pulses. So treatment again here is correction of fluid and electrolyte balance. So in hypokalemia, what should be the treatment of choice? So you can give oral drinks with potassium rich fluids. Potassium chloride is the commonly used salt. Okay, intravenous replacement with potassium chloride solution in severe cases who can't take orally, and digitalis should be avoided in hypokalemic patients. There is another term, pseudo hyperkalemia, which is seen whenever there is hemolysis or in polycythemia or in leukocytosis. This condition is in why it happens in hemolysis, because whenever there is cell lysis, there is release of potassium, because potassium is mainly intracellular electrolyte. It gets released from the cells, leading to pseudo hyperkalemia. So whenever you send a sample to lab, please ensure that sample should not hemolyzed. You never push the sample through fine needles in the vacutainers, because while putting pressure and pushing, it helps in hemolysis of the cells, leading to hemolysis causing false hyperkalemia. That is known as pseudo hyperkalemia. And treatment of uh, hyperkalemia is intravenous glucose and insulin, because this promotes glycogenolysis. Okay, calcium gluconate is given to decrease the membrane excitability, and in severe cases, isotonic sodium bicarbonate is given to promote potassium shifting inside the cell, and hemodialysis is also done in the renal failure cases. So these are treatment of choice for hyperkalemia. And the basic thing, along with correction, you have to correct the underlying cause. Otherwise, whatever correction you are giving, that is temporary. So here I am ending my lecture of fluid and electrolyte imbalance. So any questions, please go through the lecture. I think many students, they are non-attentive, at least who are listening to lecture attentively. So I request all of them to, if you have any question, please let me know. Please go through the lecture, and once you go through the whole lecture, I think this chapter is given nicely in Vasudevan and Dr. Gupta's book. If I think Dr. S.K. Gupta book everyone is having, so you can just go through that lecture. And in case you have some problem, I will send my PPTs to you, and in case you have some problem, please let me know. Either inform me via mail, or you can ask me individually. You can post your questions on your MBBS batch group, WhatsApp group, and I will tell someone, some senior resident, to forward me those questions, and then I will take your queries either by mail or through WhatsApp only. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your listening. I think whosoever was listening, not sleeping. So uh, this lecture is very important clinically. Although you may not be able to see any clinical presentation here, but when you go to ward, this you will find this lecture very helpful while managing the fluid and electrolyte balance, your dehydration part, overhydration part, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hyperkalemia, because pseudo hyperkalemia is very common. So you should know the normal values of serum electrolytes, and what are the conditions in which there is imbalance of these these electrolyte imbalance happens, how this fluid balance is maintained in our body, what are the hormones which help in maintaining, what is the neural mechanism. Okay, so just go through this chapter. I will send my PPTs to you, and any queries just let me know. So I hope I'm stopping this lecture. So on Monday I have another lecture of acid base balance. Okay, so we will meet again on this video lecture on Monday from 11 to 1. I hope if you have some problem, you by then you can post me your queries so that I can take your queries. Thank you so much. हेलो, हाँ जी, हाँ बोलो, हाँ जी बोलो।